Well, INEOS have also incurred the wrath of the fans. Mid-season ticket prices, taking away concession tickets for the remainder of the season, were described as obscene by the Manchester United Supporters Trust. We're joined by Flex from the United View to get a better idea of what the fans are thinking. Flex, thanks for your time. We'll talk more specifically in a bit, but just generally speaking to start with, as a fan, what's your overall feeling of this first year of INEOS?
I don't think it's gone as smooth sailing, and there's been as much improvement as we would have liked within the first year. I think you'll be incredibly naive as a Manchester United fan to expect Sir Jim Ratcliffe and INEOS to come in after 17, 18 years plus years of failing and expect them to have a wand and Manchester United to be fixed within 12 months. I don't think any Manchester United fan realistically thought that. But I think it's safe to say that a lot of Man United fans thought there would be more improvement than what we have seen. I think they initially started off well with their intent, and I think they started off well with the assembling of a proper footballing structure and removing the people who had made bad decisions on transfers and player recruitment, etc. For many years under the last ownership. Well, even though the Glazers are still there, but under the last stewardship of the Glazers. So that was a good start, but I think things started to go wrong as the results started to get worse with Erik ten Hag, and they second-guessed themselves of should they not sack him. They stayed with Erik ten Hag. They decided to invest more players for Erik ten Hag, only to subsequently sack him. Sir Jim Ratcliffe, his public, very, very public admiration of Dan Ashworth and his scathing sort of analysis of Newcastle United during those negotiations, brandished them, I think, silly or stupid at one point, saying they're a bit difficult to deal with and Dan is the best in class, only to get him in and 5 months later he's sacked as well. And then you talk about the ticket prices and the lack of communication with fans and the sort of the bad decisions that have basically they've been complicit in making us struggle to be financially viable. I know it's their job to fix it, and it wasn't them who put us into this mess initially, but they haven't made the best of decisions in the first year to basically calm fans down and encourage us to think, okay, we're in safe hands here. So yeah, not the best of starts.
Obviously, as we all know, there's sort of two realities. There's what we see inside the stadium, and then there's social media, which can often be something entirely different. I mean, have you noticed a distinction between the sort of match day going fans and maybe what you're hearing on your social media channels? Is there more sort of vitriol backlash to INEOS online perhaps than there is in the stadium?
Online, of course, you get it a lot, and when we discuss on our online communities, we do live shows every morning. And actually, this morning I was sort of, I'm not going to say arguing with my own community, but there is a lot of heat on INEOS, saying, phrases that they're the Glazers 2.0. They joined the Glazers to enable them. They gave the Glazers a way out. And you sort of have to push back on some of it when you want to be more measured and say, well, hang on a minute. Just because INEOS decided to take a minority share in Manchester United does not mean that the Glazers are off the Glazers had no other options. The Glazers didn't want to sell 100% of Manchester United. The Glazers didn't receive a bid that they thought was worth selling 100% of Manchester United. So the Glazers sold the bit that they wanted to sell. They would have done that, whether it was INEOS, whether it was investors who were looking to do that anyway. Somebody was going to offer up that money. But at the same time, online, I think it's been a lot more scathing. Absolutely. They're not happy, and rightly so. And to be fair, I've seen, I traveled to quite a few away games, and especially at the home games as well. And you hear fans chatting on the concourse. It hasn't been too dissimilar, actually. Usually there is quite a big difference between maybe online and in the stadium, especially when it comes to managers and should they be sacked and a bit more patience. That's a bit different. But I have to say, guys, in terms of INEOS, it's been quite scathing across the board. I haven't seen too many match-going fans and had many conversations with them, and they say, well, it's going really well, and Sir Jim's been made out to be some guy. He's not. He's having a hard time. Most people are very critical of him, whether it be online or the match-going fans I've seen.
Flex, I was at the Fulham game last month, and that was the night that the fans really turned on Jim Ratcliffe. They were singing, I won't repeat it here, but it's fairly obvious they weren't happy with him. Are you surprised at how brutal it has been, not just from the fans, but how brutal it's been with INEOS, the job cuts, the ticket prices? I mean, the £300 million losses over the last 2 or 3 years, which doesn't really tally with the fact that I think recently Deloitte published their the club revenue list of the last year, and United are fourth. They're still making lots of money. So it doesn't kind of stack up, does it, that they're losing all this money, but they're making lots of money. And Jim Ratcliffe seems to be just burning through all of it.
Exactly. I'm not surprised by it, Mark. I'm not, because you can't pull the wool over the fans' eyes. I think especially when you've had an ownership like the Glazers, who have mistreated the club for so long and made such bad decisions and haven't been really bothered what happens to even allow the club to get to this state, fans are going to be onlooking with very, very scathing eyes, very, very significant eyes in terms of who was going to take up this next position, and it happened to be INEOS. So I'm not surprised at the scrutiny because of the decisions that they've made. I do understand that they had to start somewhere, because the question is if Manchester United are financially failing, how do they fix it? They can't keep spending like they're spending. They can't keep recruiting like they're recruiting. They can't keep operating how they're operating. So what has to change? And I understand that there has to be change. I don't think Manchester United fans, again, are naive enough to think that things don't have to change. But when you look at the way that it's been done, when they've been complicit and added to some of the financial strain, like I said, the Ruben Amorim situation, you have to pay compensation to him. You have to pay compensation to Eric Ten Hag and his coaching staff to get rid of him. You invested a further 200 odd million quid in Eric Ten Hag's team. The Dan Ashworth situation, you've also made cuts along the way. So you're basically saying that the decisions that you've made, you've basically undone financially because you've made poor decisions. And then you're asking the fans to foot the bill of that without even explaining that, without any line of communication. And I think the concession is that, to ask people, potentially pensioners or people who don't work anymore, to be paying that without any sort of communication as to why, I just think was awful. And the same for under 16s as well. I just think it was so badly done and just so tone deaf from INEOS. So I'm not surprised at how scathing the fans have been. Of course, there needs to be patience. Of course, there needs to be calm. But I just don't think INEOS have pulled the right mechanisms in terms of trying to allow fans, or at least give fans a chance to say, okay, well, there's a little bit of calm here, we're going in the right direction. Then you couple that, of course, with Manchester United being 13th/14th/15th in the league, and things haven't seemed to got better. So on the pitch and off the pitch, it's been a nightmare.
What then is the view, do you think, of Ruben Amorim, of the fans? I mean, do they sort of accept that with all the bigger picture that we're talking about here and the sort of long-term changes that are needed and a lot of the pain off the field that INEOS is inflicting, hopefully for United's point of view to come out the other side as a stronger team. In the middle of all that, you've got a manager new to the league who's losing games, a lot of games, team in the bottom half of the table. And obviously he's been very rigid in sticking to his system, even though palpably the squad doesn't suit that. I mean, what's the sort of general view of how Ruben Amorim's doing in the middle of what is obviously a very difficult wider picture?
I think there's a lot of understanding and sort of leeway, maybe even sympathy, but I would say leeway. There's a lot more leeway given to Ruben Amorim because of the context of which he's taken this job. So I think it was well documented that, he said it himself, he wanted to come at the end of the season. He was given an ultimatum by Omar Barada and co, and basically a now or never. So we said now. So with that, I think there's an acceptance from Manchester United fans that, the players who have essentially thrown Ten Hag under the bus and got him sacked, done the same to Olley, etc., etc. The players that Ten Hag bought as well that fit the way he wanted to play, which didn't last at all. There's an acceptance that Ruben Amorim is going to have his work cut out, changing that system halfway through the season, has barely managed to buy or sell a player. I mean, we take January out of it. I mean, bringing in Patrick Dorgu is a start, but other than that, there isn't any major work done. Of course, Aidan Heaven's been brought into the squad from Arsenal, but again, a youngster that cannot be relied upon now. So his hands are tied. You've got players there who don't have a future there on big contracts, or either on big contracts or they've fallen out of favour and just aren't good enough or don't want to be there, or a combination of all three. So he's had to deal with that. And of course, like you say, he's a young aspiring manager who's learning the league and learning a lot of tough lessons. So I think fans are absolutely behind Ruben Amorim. They understand that Manchester United is a broken institution and it's going to take a long time to rebuild. Of course, there's frustration sort of per 90. as fans, we get emotional per 90 when you try to dissect, that Leicester result. I was very scathing in my analysis of our performance because it was really bad. The same when Southampton came to town and outplayed Manchester United for the best part of 80 minutes, and then Ahmad saves Manchester United with a hat trick. Fans are onto things like this, and then some of the conversations have led to: should he tweak certain things for the players? Should he tweak the system? Should he tweak the formation? But then it leads to differing of opinions from fans, and this is what I'll say, especially on our online community. Some fans are saying, well, these players aren't good enough. We know they're not good enough. You've got players that are either injured all the time or just have proved they are not good enough. So what's the point in investing into them to change for them? Whether it was a 4-2-3-1, a 4-3-3 or a 4-4-2 under Eric Ten Hag, they still finished 8th and ended up getting him sacked. What best are we trying to revert back to? What's the base point? So is it not better to stick with the principles and basically weed out the players who don't have a future here? But then the pushback to that is Manchester United aren't going to sell 10 players in the summer and bring in 10 first-teamers in the summer. So there has to be some trade-off. So I think he's learning. I think he's made a couple of mistakes along the way, and I think that's fine. I think that's okay for us to accept that as fans. He's admitted that in the press conference, offering up big lines to the press, such as we're the worst team in history, and offering up lines like, I'd rather play the 60-year-old goalkeeping coach instead of Marcus Rashford, etc. And he says it in tongue-in-cheek because he comes back afterwards, sort of not with his tail between his legs, sort of saying, okay, I promised Andrew I won't go down this route. I need to. You can tell he's trying to learn. So I just think my fans are patient with him overall. I wouldn't say anyone's fed up, and yes, they were expected to see more improvement than we have seen from Ruben Amorim and the team from now. But I think there's an acceptance that this squad is just completely void of fulfilling the demands that he wants to set out.
Flex, just as a fan then, sat here right now, where do you stand on United's future? Are you sitting there thinking or feeling optimistic about what the future holds, or are you thinking maybe a bit more pessimistic that, I don't know, we could be sat here in 5 years' time talking about the same issues? I mean, where do you see Man United in 5 years?
Yeah, definitely the latter, Rob. Definitely the latter. I'll be honest with you. I'd love to sit here after a year of INEOS and go, you know what, things are starting to go in the right direction. Finally, we've got some good guidance. Finally, we've got a good structure. Finally, we've got a good manager and we're playing. I'm seeing improvements. But the truth of the matter is those things have not happened. And I sit here today as a United fan, very, very worried, very apprehensive about what's around the corner. There were times where in certain periods, I'll be honest with you, and maybe this is the fan in me and the overreaction in the moment, but going into that Arsenal and Liverpool games when they were back-to-back, after we just lost to Newcastle, I was like, I think INEOS are quite volatile. I don't know if Ruben's going to make this. Do you know what I mean? Like, if we went into Arsenal and Liverpool and lost 5-0 apiece, which is how the team was playing at the time, you start to wonder. So I've not been in a good place as a United fan at all. But I do worry for the future because I'm just not, INEOS have not filled me with confidence. I speak for myself. They haven't filled me with confidence that they've taken the ball by the horns. They know what they're doing. They're clinical in what they're doing. Some fans saw what they did with Dan Ashworth as ruthless. And I saw it as incompetence because you've earmarked this guy, decided he is the guy. He's come in for a short period, and then you decided he's not the guy. To me, that's incompetence. And some argued it's ruthlessness because if that was Ed Woodward, they'd stay and let it rot, even though the relationship was decaying. But for me, to get that so wrong so early shows incompetence. And now that job role that was so important has been soaked up by Jason Wilcox and Christian Vivell, etc. So really, did you need that role? It doesn't fill me with confidence. And the recruitment as well is something we need to address. I think they've got better at maybe some of the contracts they've handed out. They've tried to stay away from, huge sums of money. They've tried to stay away from giving out contracts that are too inflated. I understand that, but I'll be honest, I'm extremely worried about what's around the corner because there hasn't been much improvement on the pitch. But I'm willing to be patient with that. Give Ruben a pre-season. Give Ruben the players that he needs. But also, how difficult is that going to be in the summer? If Marcus Rashford doesn't do too well at Aston Villa and then's back up at United with no suitors on 325 grand a week, Casemiro still on 350 grand a week. He's got a year left in the summer. Does he still sit on that? If Anthony doesn't strike it rich at Betis, he comes back. How do you shift him? There's a lot. It hasn't worked well with Højlund and Xerxes at the minute. Do you look at offers for them? Mason Mount, what's gone on there? Luke Shaw, forever injured. He's on a couple $100,000 a week. Is he going to move on? So there's so much to fix, and I'm willing to be patient, but I'm also not very confident about the next couple of weeks, to be honest, let alone years.
Well, just finally then, I mean, you've obviously touched on how much there is still to do. And the question really is what can the club do to get the fans back on side? Now, obviously, win games and sign better players is a big part of it. But sort of beyond that, in terms of just INEOS's relationship and the sort of day-to-day interactions that they're having, I mean, what can they do to sort of change the mood and maybe change the perception about them that obviously is so negative in so many quarters?
Well, first of all, of course, is make better decisions, right? But even if I understand difficult decisions have to be made, nobody wants to see people lose their jobs. Nobody wants to see redundancies. Nobody wants to see club ambassadors, not represent the club anymore, etc. But I understand that tough decisions need to be made for Manchester United to get out of this mess. I understand that. I just think the communication as well. The sheer lack of communication and dialogue with fans. It shouldn't have taken for them to write to the 1958 group or must to communicate these. They should have been much more forthcoming than that. I think they need to be more loud in terms of communicating what it is they're trying to do and why they're trying to do it. And I think they need to start, unfortunately, increasing the strike rate of decisions. So they've got off to a bad start. Now they need to start getting things right. Okay, you start with the manager. The fans like Ruben Amorim. They like his charm. They like his personality. They like his communication. Of course, it's not going right on the pitch, but as long as the players are fighting and Ruben keeps speaking well, the fans will be there behind him. So you could say that's a start. They've got to start showing that they're being ruthless with the squad in terms of how to get rid of players who are surplus. They need to prove that the recruitment's going to improve again in the summer, and show that they mean business, because for far too long now, it's basically been a load of talk. For what I've seen as a fan, it's Sir Jim Ratcliffe strolling here saying he's going to put the Manchester back in Manchester United, whatever he means by that. Go on to say that Fulham shouldn't have higher ticket prices than Man United, so I'm gonna put the ticket prices up. I don't know if he's seen or lived in Southwest London. He's a very rich man. It's a different demographic down there for sure for ticket prices, living there by the Thames. And then I've seen him sort of lording it about Dan Ashworth, etc., and then sack him a few months later. So it's got to be better communication and just start getting a better strike rate with these decisions. Because if you keep having these bad decisions, fans are just not going to get on board with what they're trying to put down.